Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I had a subscriber ask a question which I will flip in here for you guys. And he wants to know what I think about pre-exhaustion as a muscle building technique. So let me put on my +5 hat of weaponsmithing. Let's do a little bit of crafting and let's talk about this. For those who don't know what pre-exhaustion is, he basically explained it in his question. An example would be taking a lightweight set of flies and exhausting your chest and then running over and doing bench press immediately with your chest exhausted already, so that these smaller muscles and other muscles in the compound movement don't really get worked much, and therefore they don't become limiting factors, and your chest can get more stimulation as a result of it. Alright, the cliff notes for people who don't like the longer videos. Pre-exhaustion is fine if you're doing it for fun and because you enjoy it. If people think that there is any sort of physiological advantage to it and that it's any better than just doing another isolation movement immediately behind it, they don't understand basic physiology. There's no benefit whatsoever. Now, that being said, are there benefits to doing isolation movements? Yeah, isolation movements are exercises that let you isolate one muscle mostly to try to bring it up because you feel like it's lagging behind others, because you're not happy with, say, your biceps from just doing weighted chin-ups. You're not happy with your triceps just from doing closed grip bench press and weighted dips. So people do isolation movements for things, or sometimes they do isolation movements to bring up weak points in a kinetic chain, such as for a strength athlete or for a sport-specific reason. Maybe, doing something special with your triceps as a boxer. It's just one example, so that you get a sport-specific carryover. So they have their purposes, they have their uses. However, one could argue, of course, and I have heard this argued by some bodybuilding coaches, in fact, who have prepped people successfully, that isolation movements really just create unnatural proportions. And their personal opinion that someone's technical, real proportions, just doing real-world activities as far as their buildup goes, would be best handled by just compounds, but that's a controversial statement. Generally, most people think they have their uses. I included think that isolation movements have their uses. I think compounds are just more efficient overall for just general efficiency, exercise efficiency, overall strength, even for hypertrophy, just your exercise efficiency. You can work 3 different muscles heavily at the same time. Doing 3 exercises versus 1 to get the same amount of muscle growth is just kind of silly unless you just love training. So the problem with them is that basically you're already doing one isolation movement, right? You're fatiguing that primary muscle you're trying to work, such as the pecs. Well, the pectorals are generally still the limiting factor on most people's bench press if they're performing the exercise correctly. It is a chest-dominant exercise. It also works the anterior deltoids, the triceps, a few other stabilizer muscles. Now, what you're doing by coming behind it immediately, first of all, you're taking a really short break between doing another exercise. The data we now have from the stuff I linked not long ago with Dr. Brad's latest research, longer breaks allow you to produce more hypertrophy. All right, so there's already a problem right up front with pre-exhausting a muscle. You're basically just taking a short break between working the same muscle again, and you're having to reduce the workload on the muscle in order to do that, meaning if you had given yourself enough break, if you were normally capable of bench pressing 225 for 10 reps, but you pre-exhaust your pecs with a fly, and then you run over and can only do 135 for 10 reps because you're immediately exhausted, you're stimulating less growth. Because had you waited 3 minutes after doing a quick set of flies to warm up, you could probably still go do 8 to 10 reps of 225 on the bench press had you only done 1 set first and waited 3 minutes. And all of the data shows that when you cut rest times down and have to reduce the weight on the bar or the dumbbell in order to facilitate the shorter rest times, it doesn't produce as much muscle growth as if you wait long enough to be able to lift the same weight again. So you would need a comparable load to the fly. So immediately, from the newest data, pre-exhaustion is just the equivalent of doing 2 exercises with a really short break between. So it would be no different as if you just took 30 seconds after doing your flies and to do another set of flies, right? So you're already losing gains by doing it that way versus just doing 2 normal sets. Number 2, you're just creating another isolation exercise. Pre-exhausting your chest so that your pecs are fatigued and you have to use less weight on the bench press just creates another chest isolation movement. It doesn't stimulate the chest any more than a set of flies would have, because you've basically made the primary mover fatigued and weak. So therefore, the other muscles aren't really working hard. Meaning someone who could normally bench press 225 for 10 reps, if their triceps and their delts are not fatigued yet, they're not doing enough work to stimulate any growth, right? They're getting almost no work, and then the chest is getting all the work just like it would in an isolation movement. So you've basically removed the benefit of doing a compound movement. If you pre-exhaust your quads before you do a squat, your quads are the only thing really getting any fatigue from the squat. If you pre-exhaust your pecs before doing a bench press, your pecs are the only thing getting the real fatigue. You've removed the entire purpose of doing a compound movement. The benefit of a compound movement is that you can work multiple muscle groups and develop them very effectively using a single exercise. So what you've done is taken a compound movement and made it just work one muscle again. That removes the entire benefit. You would have gotten just as much development just doing 2 sets of flies back to back as if you had pre-exhausted. There's no gain, there's no benefit. And the truth is, you guys know it would actually work better than pre-exhausting, and this is the most time-proven method. It's been known for decades. It's been found even before drugs were around by every power lifter, strength athlete, and bodybuilder in the whole world figured this out years ago. It's been known for decades. It's been known for over 60 years. That if you do your big compound movements and then wait and do your with actually relatively heavy weight, meaning close to your 8 rep max or 8 rep sets, close to your 10 rep max for 10 rep sets, and then you do the isolation movements afterwards. You do the big movements, then the isolation movements after you've waited a few minutes break. You actually get the most muscle gains. That's been a time-proven method, and the fact that someone wants to come in and mess with it with a method that when you look at all the science data looking at it actually produces slightly inferior results is just silly. There are times, guys, when the time-proven methods that work for 50 years actually work for a reason. People experimented and just found intrinsically that these are the thing that worked best, and that's generally go from the biggest muscles to the smallest muscles. To go from the biggest exercises to the smallest exercises. Was found generations ago from those guys that just give them the best results. And then now that you look at the science behind it and you look at what we know about rest times and everything else, it becomes apparent that pre-exhaustion is actually an inferior way to train, even for size. The argument people will make, of course, is that, well, it's safer. But you know what? It's not safer. You're telling me that exhausting your quads and then getting under a squat just because you have less weight on it, that you're less risk of injuring or tearing something? No, you're not. You're still just as exhausted and fatigued. It's form breakdown and excessive workload that contributes to injuries. And once you're extremely fatigued because you've already burned out the primary mover in a big, heavy compound, you're just as likely for your form to break down. And you know what? 135 pounds, once form breaks down and you're fatigued and connective tissue is inflamed and everything else, can contribute to injuries just as quickly as 225 can. It's still about bad technique and form degradation. And you know what? A lot of guys who tend to do this type of exhaustion training experience a lot of form degradation. So it's not really any safer. And you know what? If you're using proper workloads, proper techniques, proper form, even fairly heavy weights, the injury rate tends to be very, very low if you're training correctly. So doing it, claiming it's an injury prevention thing is just silly. Because the injury prevention would be minimal at best. But as far as the actual gains go, it's fair to say when you look at the way the body works, you look at traditional training methods, pre-exhaustion would actually potentially give you less muscle gains than just using traditional training with traditional rest times. Again, do your compound movements first, follow up with your isolation movements for your weak points, normal rest times, normal work ranges, normal intensities. Actually is superior and will probably give you better results the majority of the time. So all in all, pre-exhaustion is kind of a silly idea. I mean, it makes sense if you think about it very briefly. Sometimes it sounds like it makes sense. It looks good on paper. But when you study it a little closer, it's really an inferior technique. And the only reason a lot of guys, big bodybuilders, get away with inferior techniques sometimes because they have great genetics and they're on tons of drugs. And sometimes at the end of the day, you really can't tell what's working or not in that environment because honestly, guys who are amazingly genetically gifted, who are on boatloads of anabolic drugs, the truth is probably just about any form of training is going to give them amazing results. They're genetically gifted and they're using huge amounts of drugs. They could probably get pretty big doing jumping jacks and push-ups if that's all they did. Doesn't mean that because a few bodybuilders have done a method and they saw results doing it, that it's amazing. You know what? They would have got just as good of results doing some other method as well. It's not the method itself for them. It's their genetics and drugs. So don't take it too seriously when these guys make claims of certain things working. If you're not as gifted as they are, you're not using their drug stack on top of it, you need to find out what actually really works instead of just some anecdote from the bodybuilding world. Because in the long term, you're going to be better off for it. You're going to get better gains. You're not going to burn out as easy. You're probably going to have lower injury rates. Using time-proven and effective methods that are backed by scientific studies on top of it. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.